Bobby Hughes here with Hollow Point Firearms, and today we're going to be working on stock fitting. Alright, it's probably something that, to be honest with you, I should have done before I started putting the finish coats on the stock, but it wasn't something that I really thought about at the time because and I'll explain it in just a little bit, but it wasn't something I really thought about. Now that I'm into it, I've definitely got to make this stock fit the trigger frame properly. So we're working on the Winchester 1906 model, and so stick with us and we'll get started, and I'll show you some little tips to making your stock fit properly. Alright guys, so I'm going to try a new camera angle here to see how this works out. Maybe the lighting will be a little bit better for you. Got an HD cam, and it doesn't really seem like it shoots HD because I think the lighting is so poor usually that it's so grainy it doesn't look like it's high def. So anyway, what I was talking about earlier in and the reason why it doesn't fit properly is, you got to think about this. This rifle is 100 years old. Alright, it's over 100 years old. It was actually produced in 1906, and so anyway, back then, you know, guns were just as important tool in life as a hammer was. And if I had to guess, I would say that this gun probably rode around in the back of a pickup truck most of its days, and or on the side of a tractor or something. And it was in rough shape, and you could tell it was in rough shape. And a little trick that the farmers and stuff used to use years ago was they would actually soak their buttstocks and stuff down in motor oil, and that would it would waterproof them. It would keep them from rotting and things like that. After years and years of that, you know, motor oil, any type of oil or lubricant, is sticky and it collects everything. So over time, what that does is it softens the wood, and all those particles and stuff are sticking to it, all the dust and grime and dirt, and it all sticks to it, and it forms what I like to call as a grunge layer. Alright? And the grunge layer is a real soft layer of the actual wood that comes off of the wood when we cleaned it up. Alright? And it's just a grungy, like if I would have taken my fingernails and ran it across the stock when I first picked this thing up, I would have had just so much gunk under my nails it would have been ridiculous. Well, it's not just the outside of the stock that gets like that. The inside of the stock and the tip gets like that too. Alright, and you can actually see the color difference here. Here's the finished part. That's what it looked like before, that blackish color. And I could probably still scrape stuff out of there. But anyway, what we're going to do is we're going to try to make this trigger frame fit properly. Okay? So this is how the trigger frame actually slides down onto the stock. And I've got it pulled tight right now. Let's see if I can get a view for you here. You can see the light through there. Alright, right there, because it's not fitting tight. Alright, we've got to get that to fit tight. We still have room here, so the first thing I check is I want to check right here to see if we have room here for this to slide down in there, and we do. Alright, and it looks like it's not hitting here. So you would think by looking at it that, you know, just glance, well, where's it hitting at that it's causing it to stop like that? Well, if we remove this and you look right in here, let me see if I can get some light in there for you. You look right in here, there's a layer of just gunk and crap in there. Alright, so the first thing I'm going to do is try to use something and scrape that out and see if I can scrape it. And if that still doesn't work, then I'll take the Dremel and stick a little mini sand drum down in there and whittle away at that a little bit until we can get it to fit properly. Alright, and through the process, what I may have to do is actually trim some of this too to get it to fit. But we've got to get rid of that gap. And you'll see that here the gap is a little bit bigger at the top There we go. A little bit bigger at the top than it is at the bottom. That's because we're fitting tighter down here. But in order for this thing to work properly, everything has to be square. So what we'll do is probably have to end up trimming some of this out too. And then to fit properly, when it's tightened down, it should set about like that, so that you have a little bit of lip over the top. So it won't be perfectly smooth. It'll have just a little bit of a lip, a little bit of a bump when you rub your finger across it. If you look at the bottom, it actually sets down inside of there, and the wood actually protrudes over it. Well, the way it was supposed to work is that wood was actually built up a little bit more, so that when you slid this down over there, it lifted that up and pulled it tight. Alright? If I was to put the screw in here, the tang screw that holds this thing together, and tighten it down, the tang screw is actually going to protrude out of the bottom of this thing probably a good 1/4 of an inch. Maybe not quite that much, but close. And that to me just looks tacky. It looks like some kitchen gunsmith did it. So I definitely want to make sure it's done right. So what we're going to do, just to give you kind of a, because I don't want to have to stop and explain everything as I'm going, what we're going to do is first we're going to try to see if we can get this to fit a little bit tighter here. Alright? And then we're going to work on this to see if we can get this thing, the first step is to get this thing to set flush. Alright? Once we get it to set flush here, then we're going to use some fiberglass bedding, and we're going to fiberglass the bedding in here so that it doesn't rot anymore. Alright? Also, what we're going to do is I have a aluminum rod here that the screw fits. It almost fits perfectly, but not quite. I'm going to have to do some whittling on it, and I'll just use a drill bit to do that. But once we get this trimmed out, we may have to trim this hole back a little bit, and then this rod will fit down through this hole, and it will create like a sleeve, a protected sleeve. Aluminum won't ever rot. So we're going to stick that, we're going to have a protective sleeve in there with the fiberglass bedding, and that should hold it nice and tight, make everything set flush, and keep our screw from protruding, and prevent any rot or rust in the future from loosening that back up. Alright? So let's go ahead and get started. Alright, so I'm going to try to do as much of this in the camera view as I can here. You can see what I've done here is I just used a piece of cardstock, and I laid my trigger frame flush where it would normally be when it touches the end of the buttstock here, and took a little very fine tip permanent marker, Sharpie marker, and I traced it, including the hole, and I cut it out. Alright, and then what we do with that is I can actually take and lay that on the stock here flush to see what kind of trim work I need to do. Alright, you can see that it's bowing up back here. See if you guys can see that it's bowing up, and it's touching the back. So that means that we need to remove some here in order to make it fit. Everything else looks like it's going to fit up nice. Maybe just a little bit right here on the edge we'll have to take off, but for the most part it looks like it's all back here. Alright, so in order to do that, probably just going to go ahead and use the drill. Alright guys, so basically what I did was I've got this thing fit pretty tight now. You notice that there's not that gap between the back of the trigger guard and the stock now. And so what I did was I just slowly took off a little bit here and a little bit here, and then I ended up, it was a little uneven up here, so I ended up leveling that off there. And now I would say that it fits pretty tight, so I'm happy with that. So our next step is to reinforce our hole back here where a screw is going to go, and I'm trying to look here and see. It looks like we're riding right on the back of this hole here, so that just means that I need to make sure that when I set my post, set it on the back of that hole.